Samir Qureshi never minded the night shift. In fact, he preferred it. The corridors of Pinebrook High School were quiet after 10 p.m., long after the last teacher had gone home and the final hallway light was switched off. The world outside felt heavy and loud, but here, inside the school, there was order. Samir was a man of routine. Sweep, mop, empty trash, polish floors, repeat. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work, and steady work meant rent, food, and medicine for his ailing mother. That night was like every other. The autumn wind howled through the cracked windows of the gymnasium. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Samir dragged his mop bucket along the corridor, the squeak of the wheels echoing down the hallway. He hummed softly to himself, an old habit to keep the silence from feeling too heavy. Down the hall, he could see his reflection in the freshly polished floor. His gray janitor's uniform looked a size too big, his dark hair messy from the constant humidity of the boiler room. He was tired, but satisfied. He had one more wing to finish before he could sit down with his thermos of tea and the book he was reading, a murder mystery he'd found left behind in the library. The school, in the middle of nowhere, was old. Older than Samir could guess. Some of the doors were warped, and sometimes the heaters made a noise like a groaning animal. Samir didn't mind. He'd grown used to every creak and rattle. Or so he thought. That night, while mopping near the science lab, he heard a sound he had never heard before. It was faint at first. A dragging sound. Slow. Wet. He stopped humming, listening carefully. Nothing. The school was silent again. Samir shook his head, smiling at his own nerves. Maybe it was just water dripping from a pipe. Maybe a loose piece of ductwork had shifted. Still. He felt something in his stomach, a tightness, as though someone were standing just behind him. He turned quickly, mop handle raised. Empty hallway. He chuckled nervously and went back to work, telling himself he was overreacting. By 11 p.m., Samir was almost done. He rolled the mop bucket toward the janitor closet near the basement stairs. Those stairs led to the oldest part of the building, the basement storage and boiler room. He hated that basement. Even in summer, it was always cold down there. The air smelled of mold and rust, and the single bare bulb barely lit the concrete step. Samir tried to go down there only once per shift, just to check the boiler gauge and make sure the furnace hadn't tripped. But tonight, as he passed the top of the stairs, he heard it again. Drag. Slow, wet, scraping against the floor. But this time, it came from below. Samir froze. The sound stopped. He leaned over the top step, listening. Only the faint hum of the boiler. Samir shook his head. "You're tired, man," he muttered to himself. "Just finish the shift." He forced himself to turn away from the stairs. But as he started walking, he swore he heard something faint, a whisper, too soft to understand, carried up from the basement. For the first time in months, Samir locked the janitor closet early and decided to take his break. He sat in the teacher's lounge, poured tea from his thermos, and tried to read. But he couldn't stop thinking about the noise. Something about it felt wrong. Not just strange, wrong. Like it didn't belong in the world at all. Samir couldn't sleep when he got home that morning. Even after scrubbing the smell of disinfectant off his hands and sitting with his mother for breakfast, his mind kept replaying that sound, slow, dragging, almost deliberate. He told himself it was nothing. Old buildings make noises. Maybe a pipe had burst in the basement, maybe a stray cat had gotten in through one of the broken windows, but deep down, he knew it wasn't a cat. When he returned to work that night, the air inside the school felt different. Still, heavy, as if the whole building was holding its breath. He pushed his mop bucket through the halls, his ears tuned to every tiny sound. His footsteps echoed too loudly, and every shadow seemed too long. By the time he reached the stairwell near the basement, his heart was already beating faster. He paused, hand on the railing, listening. At first, there was nothing. Then, faint, almost playful, came that same sound. Drag. Freight. But now it was followed by something new, A sound like wet breathing, slow and rattling. Samir's mouth went dry. He gripped the railing tighter. "Hello?" he called down, voice cracking despite himself. Silence. Then, from somewhere below, came a sound that froze him in place. A laugh. Faint, broken, like someone who hadn't laughed in years was trying to remember how. Samir backed away from the stairs. He didn't check the boiler that night. The next day, he tried to talk to his supervisor, Mr. Farrows, about it. Basement. Farrows frowned. "You hear noises down there?" Samir nodded. "Something's moving." And laughing. Farrow's face went still. After a moment, he sighed. "You're not the first to say that." Samir blinked. "What?" Farrows lowered his voice. 5 years ago, a janitor quit after a week. Said he saw someone standing in the dark down there, but when the lights came on, nobody was there. We had the police check it out. Nothing. Cameras don't pick up anything, either. Cameras? Farrows nodded grimly. We put one in the hallway facing the basement door. Every night around 3 a.m., the feed glitches. Just for a few seconds. Then it's fine. Glitches? Samir repeated, his skin crawling. Yeah. But we can't catch anything on it. Just static. Samir stared at him. You still want me to check the boiler? Farrows hesitated. You don't have to go down there alone. Take the flashlight. And if you hear something, leave. Don't be a hero. That night, Samir brought the flashlight. His hand trembled as he clicked it on and pointed it down the basement stairs. Concrete step. Rusted rail. Nothing. But he forced himself to go down anyway. The smell hit him first, stronger than usual, like rotting wood mixed with stagnant water. His boots made hollow thuds on the step. The beam of the flashlight bounced on the walls, revealing pipes, shelves stacked with old paint cans, and a floor wet with condensation. The boiler loomed in the far corner, its metal surface sweating under the weak light. Samir swallowed and approached it, shining the light on the gauge. Pressure normal. Temperature normal. Good. He turned to go and froze. Someone was standing at the bottom of the stairs. Not moving. Just standing there, in the dark. Samir's breath caught in his throat. Who's there? The figure didn't answer. The beam of his flashlight flickered, just for a second, and when it came back, the figure was closer. Samir bolted. He sprinted up the stairs 2 steps at a time, heart hammering, nearly tripping as he burst back into the hallway. He slammed the basement door shut and locked it. For several minutes, he just stood there, back against the door, trying to catch his breath. When he finally dared to look through the narrow window set in the door, the stairwell was empty. The next night, Samir considered calling in sick. But he needed the paycheck. And maybe, just maybe, it had all been in his head. Still, he couldn't shake the memory of the figure. It hadn't moved like a normal person. It hadn't felt like a normal person. He worked quickly, avoiding the basement door entirely. At around 3 a.m., while emptying the trash near the computer lab, he heard it again. But this time, the sound wasn't coming from the basement. It was coming from the hallway, just around the corner. Drag. Freight. Slow, deliberate. Samir froze. Then, laughter. Closer than before. He turned and ran. That was the night he realized the thing from the basement wasn't staying in the basement anymore. Samir barely slept that morning. He stayed up staring at the ceiling, every creak of his apartment making him flinch. By the time his shift came around, he'd made up his mind. This was the last night. If something was in that school with him, he needed to know what it was, or he'd go insane wondering. When he arrived at Pinebrook High, the building looked darker than usual, as though the sunset itself hadn't wanted to stick around. He grabbed the flashlight and an old crowbar from the supply closet, the closest thing to a weapon he could find, and went straight to the security office. The night guard, Malik, was half asleep with his feet on the desk. "You look like hell," Malik muttered, sitting up. Samir hesitated. He'd avoided talking about the basement to most people, afraid they'd think he was losing it. But Malik had been there for years. If anyone knew what was really going on, it was him. You ever hear noises here? Samir asked carefully. Malik frowned. You mean like rats? No. Like, Samir swallowed. Like someone dragging something. Or laughing. Malik's face changed. He slowly reached over and turned one of the monitors toward Samir. This was from last night, he said quietly. The footage showed the hallway near the basement door. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the screen glitched, just like Pharaoh's had said, a flash of static. When the picture came back, something was standing in the hallway. At first Samir thought it was just a man. But as the thing slowly turned its head toward the camera, Samir saw it wasn't a man at all. Its skin looked waterlogged, its mouth stretched too wide in a grin that showed far too many teeth. Its arms hung too long, knuckles nearly scraping the floor. And even though the footage had no sound, Samir swore he could hear it laugh. Malik shut off the monitor. You see why I don't like working here, he muttered. Why don't you tell anyone? Samir demanded. Who's gonna believe me? The school board? The cops? They'd just fire me. And whatever that thing is, it never hurts anyone. Samir's blood ran cold. Not yet, he said. Samir spent the rest of the night waiting. By 2:45 a.m., his nerves were fraying. He stood at the top of the basement stairs, crowbar in one hand, flashlight in the other, heart hammering against his ribs. The air was thick, damp, and too quiet. He waited, and right at 3 a.m., he heard it. Drag. Freight. Coming closer. Samir forced himself down the stairs, one slow step at a time. Halfway down, the light bulb above him flickered and went out. He clicked on the flashlight, the beam slicing through the dark. The basement was empty, at least, at first glance. Then he saw it. A shadow too tall to be his, moving against the far wall. Samir tightened his grip on the crowbar. Show yourself, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The thing stepped out of the darkness. Up close, it was worse than he imagined. Its skin was pale and slick, like something pulled from the bottom of a lake. Its grin split its face nearly to the ears. And its eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to swallow the light. Samir stumbled back. The thing tilted its head, as though curious, then took a slow step toward him. The air grew colder with each step it took, his breath visible now in the beam of the flashlight. Samir raised the crowbar. Stay back. The thing laughed. A broken, rattling laugh that made Samir's stomach twist. Then it lunged. Samir swung wildly, the crowbar connecting with a sickening crack. The thing stumbled but didn't fall. It grabbed the crowbar with one impossibly long arm and yanked it from Samir's hands. Samir turned and ran. He sprinted up the stairs, the sound of its wet, dragging steps following him. He barely made it through the basement door before slamming it shut and throwing the bolt. For several minutes, the thing pounded on the other side of the door. Then, silence. When Samir finally looked through the small window, the stairwell was empty. But something was scratched into the concrete wall at the bottom of the step. A single word. Stay. That night, Samir didn't go back to finish his rounds. He sat in the teacher's lounge, shaking, staring at the door. He knew it wasn't over. Whatever that thing was, it didn't just want to scare him anymore. It wanted him to stay. Samir didn't go home that morning. He sat in the empty parking lot long after the sun came up, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the school as though it were alive. He wanted to quit. Every part of him screamed to never step foot in that building again. But when he thought about his mother, the rent, her medication, the bills piling up, he knew he couldn't just walk away. So, he came back the next night. And the night after that. He avoided the basement door as much as possible, working quickly, never letting himself linger in any one hallway for too long. But the thing didn't stay in the basement anymore. Sometimes, he'd catch a glimpse of it reflected in the freshly waxed floors, standing just behind him, too close, but when he spun around, nothing was there. Other times, he'd hear it whispering in the vents. Stay. Stay. The more nights passed, the harder it became to ignore. Samir started leaving notes for himself on the teacher's lounge whiteboard. Just finished the shift. It's not real. Keep moving. But the notes never stayed where he left them. One night, he came in to find a message scrawled across the board in thick black marker. Stay with us. Samir dropped his mop. By the third week, he was barely eating, barely sleeping. Malik noticed. You look worse every night, the guard said, sipping coffee. Whatever you're doing, man, stop doing it. Samir laughed bitterly. You think I can just stop? It's everywhere now. Not just in the basement. It follows me. I hear it at home. Malik's face paled. At home? Samir nodded slowly. Last night, my bathroom mirror fogged up, and there was a word written in it. Stay. Malik swallowed hard. You know what I think, he said quietly. I think that thing doesn't just live here. I think it chooses people. And once it chooses you. He trailed off. Samir didn't need him to finish. That night, he made his decision. He would go back down to the basement. Not to run, not to hide, but to end this. He waited until 2:50 a.m., then grabbed the flashlight, crowbar, and a can of gasoline from the maintenance shed. If the school wanted him to stay, then it would burn with him. The basement felt colder than ever as he descended the step. The air was so thick with moisture he could see his breath. He reached the bottom and shone the flashlight across the room. Empty. He splashed the gasoline across the floor, the smell choking him. Then he lit a match. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the flame caught, spreading quickly across the wet concrete. The heat drove him back toward the stairs. And that's when he saw it. The thing stepped out of the far shadows, completely unfazed by the fire. It smiled wider than ever, its teeth glinting in the firelight. Then it spoke. Not a whisper, not a laugh, but in a voice that sounded almost human. You're already staying. Samir froze. The flames roared higher, but the thing didn't burn. It just stood there, watching, as though amused. Then the light bulb overhead flickered, and went out. When Samir opened his eyes, he was standing in the hallway. His crowbar and flashlight were gone. The basement door was locked, no sign of fire damage anywhere. But his hands were wet, covered in something dark and slick. And in the faint reflection of the hallway window, he saw something that made his blood run cold. His eyes were black. Just like its. Samir never left Pinebrook High again. The next morning, Malik found his mop bucket abandoned in the hallway, the floors half cleaned. The school board assumed he'd run off, leaving everything behind. But at night, janitors who work the late shift swear they still hear him. The sound of a mop bucket rolling down the hall. And sometimes, if they dare to look down into the basement, they see a figure staring up at them with hollow, black eyes. And if they listen closely, they hear a voice whisper from the dark. Stay. Haunting lesson. The school always gets a new janitor eventually. But some buildings don't just need cleaning, they need someone to belong to them. And once they choose you, you never really leave.